I'm going to introduce the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust and a private land prioritization tool. My name is Jennika Hunsinger, and I'm the Land Trust and Outreach Manager at the Medway Community Forest Co-op. The MCFC has been incubating this new land trust. The MCFC is a member-based community cooperative that manages 15,000 hectares of crown lands in the Annapolis County that has been piloting ecological forestry and alternatives to traditional crown land management for about 8 years now, and is always intended to serve private woodlot stewards in one way or another. Developing this new land trust was really came out of a need, a demand for a protection mechanism to offer woodland stewards. It will support and uphold ecological forestry practices and provide economic opportunities while balancing multiple forest values. We're building a working woodlands trust to uphold forest stewardship. In Nova Scotia, the majority, over 60% of forests are privately stewarded, and many of these landowners are aging, in retirement age or older, and often don't have a clear plan for who will manage their lands after their time. If they do pass on lands to their kin or successors, they are often displaced from the forest, either living in an urban environment or in another province, and they may sell the land to the highest bidder. These new landowners may be forced to cut a portion of the woodlot to help pay capital gains taxes that occur with the transfer. As well, the current owners, or at any time, may be forced to liquidate the woodlot to pay for retirement or any large purchases in an economic pinch. All of these scenarios or uncertainties result in poor forestry practices and have an impact on forest health. So these images really highlight some of the common threats to our private land forests in the province. The top left really showcases clear-cut or liquidation of the forest asset for economic purposes or for land conversion. To the right, you see agriculture or blueberry fields, and below that represents subdivision, where particularly in lake regions, properties are subdivided into small lots for cottage or home development, all of which have severe impacts on forest health and wildlife habitat availability. When considering connectivity on a landscape level in a network of parks and protected areas, crown and private forest land management, you can see here on the left of Turtle Lake is Kejimkujik National Park, and then to the right it transitions to private and crown forest land management. Placing an easement on a forest land can help balance multiple values from carbon sequestration and climate resiliency and biodiversity and balanced with timber harvesting and forest management while maintaining forest cover. Our vision for a working woodlands trust supports the community, the environment, and woodland stewards. Through maintaining forest cover and growing quality forest products, helps sustain income over time instead of liquidation logging, supports landscape connectivity, and promotes ecological forestry on privately stewarded lands through improved forest management practices. The woodland stewards themselves, an easement upholds their stewardship legacy and forest health in perpetuity regardless of who owns the land down the line. We provide access to carbon markets to help cover the costs of any of the endowment fees, and we can integrate the current landowners' values into the long-term stewardship planning as we manage the property down the line. Working forest easements will be upheld through the Community Easements Act, complementing existing traditional conservation-focused land trusts, and maintained and upheld through annual monitoring and stewardship. Privately owned lands may request an easement. As well, we will hold lands in trust either through donation or direct acquisition, and we'll access the carbon markets to support and pay for the endowment costs. The community easement is a legally binding document that is tied to the property deed in perpetuity. and it is between an eligible body, which would be the land trust, and the landowner, even if the landowner changes through time. And this is all done through the Community Easements Act. Within it outlines restrictions, allowances regarding the land use, including future property development, natural resource extraction, and includes annual stewardship and monitoring. The land trust itself will not provide the forest management services, and this will be done through partner regional woodlot service providers since they already exist and do a wonderful job. So we'll dive into the agreed practices and look to land zoning. Since we recognize that many woodlots are multifunctional, there may be areas that the woodland steward does not wish to place under easement. So we would carve out of the agreed practices any agriculture, current or future, including Christmas trees, any non-commercial aggregate use or residential zones. And the agreed practices apply to the forest zone, where you would continue to conduct ecological forestry and improved forest management. You could carve out sections for forever wild or conservation zones within that. And within the forest, there may be delineation for recreational off-grid cabins, either that currently exist or where there may be plans to develop one in the future. Here we dive into the agreed practices that are tied within that forest zone. It includes permitted, restricted, and prohibited uses. The permitted, to name a few, are some of those low-impact activities such as hiking, trail clearing, non-commercial foraging, or motorized vehicle use such as ATVs. The restricted activities, they require a 60-day notification prior to start, and that includes for activities regarding forest harvesting, new road construction, or restoration projects within the forest. The prohibited activities include subdivision, liquidation, unsustainable harvesting practices, or land clearing for a new home or construction project. So talking about ecological forestry and defining it a little bit farther, I will note too that the properties will require an FSC certified management plan, and allowed on the easement property are merchantable and non-merchantable forestry activities or silviculture that consider climate adaptivity, that mimic natural disturbance while maintaining biodiversity features and ecological functions, as well as includes areas to preserve forever wild areas, and that would be delineated at the time of easement creation and may be added down the line. Prohibited on easement properties are unsustainable or ecologically inappropriate forestry practices, which would include clear cutting, overstory removal, or salvage harvesting, or the removal of any permanent retention features within any forestry activity. So just quickly covering some acquisition or eligibility criteria for interested landowners. We are starting by looking at properties that are greater than 50 acres of forest land, but the bigger the better to help us get to that 10,000 acre launching point. And of that, 50% or more should be mature forest, being greater than 40 years and either in a managed or natural state. With some bonuses here, supporting contiguous forested landscapes or connectivity features, access to recreation, public trails, mountain bike trails, those sorts of things, as well as the property should have minimal human structures and buildings within the forest area and a presence of wildlife or special habitat features. As I mentioned earlier, the land trust itself will not be creating forest management plans, but work with the existing network of trusted partners across the province. And there's a list of those here. It's also available on our website. You can find this. And these folks would support management plans, contracts for harvesting and silviculture, and supervision of operations. And the land trust is a member of the Family Forest Network, which is helping to pilot ecological forestry on small private woodlots across the province. So we know based on other conservation land trusts or working forest trusts in the States is that long-term monitoring is expensive, and the cost of the endowment is really dependent on the woodlot area and its location, as well as the risk of infraction. So we can estimate that the endowment will fall between $70 and $150 per acre. So diving into carbon credits, that will finance working forest conservation easements and their endowments. The Land Trust will facilitate the aggregation of a network of easement properties reaching 10,000 acres as a minimum to inventory and access the carbon market. The revenue generated through this will cover all of the endowment costs for those properties, and any additional revenue will be issued back to the landowner over the course of the agreement term. The carbon agreement term will likely be 40 years, though the easement agreement is still in perpetuity. So as we're looking to launch in 2023, we're looking for woodlot stewards that have larger tracts of land and exceptional stewardship legacies that are interested in that long-term protection. The carbon agreement pairs really well with the working forest easement purposes, where the carbon agreement is 40-year term and precedes the easement agreement by just a few months. They both are tied to improved forest management protocol, where the stewardship and silvicultural practices promote healthy forests and tree growth. At the same time, it improves stand resiliency and improves the rate at which carbon is sequestered in the forest over time. The easement secures this forest carbon beyond the length of the 40-year agreement, since it is in perpetuity, and upheld through annual monitoring, where any infractions are remediated over time. Right, so that sums up the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust, the purpose, the rationale, and the structure to which we hope to protect forest lands in the future. The launch is anticipated for 2023. We applied for eligibility under the Community Easements Act some time ago, and we're just waiting for that approval to be able to hold easements. A project we've been working on in the interim, as well as setting up the foundation for the new land trust, is this, a private land prioritization tool, which we received funding through the Habitat Conservation Fund, and have been working in partnership with numerous conservation-based organizations and researchers, initially in Gaspoick in southwest Nova Scotia, and we are expanding the tool to be province-wide now. So what it does is it builds off of the existing Nova Scotia private land prioritization tool that was completed in 2019 in partnership with the Mersey-Tobiatic Research Institute and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And what it does, it combines existing data layers and forest value factors at the parcel scale and uses a hierarchical ranking aggregation. And really what that means is there will be a mapping tool that partner organizations will be able to use to scroll through regions and be able to click on individual properties to assess or read their ranking. It will help support outreach for education and easements and direct acquisition to high priority lands. Some of the factors include recent harvests and canopy closure by looking at recent LiDAR data that was flown in the last few years, so it's quite up to date in that way. And then compiles data for species at risk, predictive habitat models for Canada warblers and other species at risk or species of interest. And it includes connectivity to assess landscape connectivity, as well as relations to other protected areas, parcels that are already under easement with the Nature Conservancy of Canada or the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. And we've been working with this great group of partners over the last year or so, and we'll have this tool complete next spring, and we'll be using it in partnership with the Mersey-Tobiatic Research Institute to locate high priority individual properties, to connect with landowners, and to go out and conduct forest biodiversity assessments on their properties. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions or want to learn more, definitely check out our website or feel free to email or reach out. I'd be happy to share more information or connect you with some more resources for interested landowners. Thanks.